Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of High Vibe Monday. Today I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence in business. What I want you to ponder on, and I have been pondering on this for quite a while, is that when we think business, we rarely think that we need to address our emotions. And this was definitely the case for me when I was in a job. Okay, I had my private life and my emotions belonged there, and when I came into the office I was supposed to turn into this stoic, almost non-human being that could just get on with things, be all in the mind and have no emotions at all around what was happening. It was all about, balance sheets, marketing, products and services. In my case, because I was a lawyer, it's all about contracts, deals, that sort of thing. It's all very intellectual, but what we forget is that we are human beings. And in business, when we tend to bury our emotions inside of ourselves, they are kept alive. We push them down, we compound them, and they stay in our bodies. And this is actually how illnesses can surface, disease, because we have all these emotions that are bottled up inside of us. And I will say women are particularly good at doing that. And in the end, what happens is it's all like a bucket. And this is what we teach in clinical hypnotherapy, is that you have like a bucket of emotions. And if you don't handle your emotion on a daily basis, on a regular basis when they happen, the bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller until you actually get to the point where you can't really control your emotions anymore. You will get triggered by the smallest thing. Something will happen that's relatively minor, but you will have an exaggerated reaction to it. And it's not your fault, it's because you have this bucket that's full, and the smallest thing that comes on top of it makes it spill out, if that makes any sense. So when our bucket is full, we fly off the handle. Anger rises very easily. It might not be in the office, but it might be in your car, and you get into road rage. Sleep is more difficult, and we worry more about a lot of things. We're like caught up in this negative cycle of emotion. So there's several ways to empty the buckets, and I'm going to talk about all of them because they're really important. The first one, which I might have mentioned in this podcast before, is to listen to a guided meditation that will empty. Because when you listen to a guided meditation and you allow yourself to relax into the rhythm of, and that's why therapeutic meditation are better than just general meditation, because they will first relax your body completely and then take you into a journey of imagining that you're on a beach maybe. Mine does take you to the beach, and then you imagine that all your worries float out of your head into this big cloud, and then that the wind takes it away. These things are really, really good because they take you into the trance stage, and when you're in trance, it's the same quality of energy than when you sleep, especially the REM sleep. So if you don't have very good sleep, or if your sleep is not enough to empty your bucket, listening to a guided meditation is very good. And if you're interested, reach out to me through my page. I can help you thrive on Facebook, or through my website, I can help you thrive.com. There's a contact page. I don't have a shop with my meditations, but I have 9 different meditations that I offer that have been I created myself with my own words, with a therapeutic intent. So that's one way, at least, to make the bucket not as full of all this stuff, but it doesn't actually address the emotions themselves. And at one point, you're going to have to deal with them. And this is one thing I've had to do, and I've been on it for years and years and years, because for many years, and you will probably relate to this, I just had to get on with life. I was a single mum, I had 2 young children, I didn't have time to do the journaling and look after myself and all that sort of stuff. And I back then I didn't know about it either. So it caught up with me, so to speak, and I've been doing this intense emotional release and clearing almost every day. And life continues. Every day you might have some new emotions that come up. So it's really important that we use this emotional intelligence first by becoming aware of our emotions, and then by dealing with them in a healthy way. So if someone triggers you, if something makes you react, if you get angry by reading a post on Facebook, take it as a golden opportunity to look at because it is you. And nobody can make you angry without your permission. Nobody can make you sad without your permission. It's always about the way you look at things. It's always about the internal wound that's being scratched by someone outside of you. But if there was no wound, there would be no pain. So look at it and notice what has been annoying you recently and dig into it, okay? So there's several ways to dig into it. I've mentioned journaling. There is a whole episode about it. I think with journaling, which is your first option, and it's probably a step one, is to ask yourself some questions, some open-ended questions. So you would ask, how does success make me feel? How does someone else's success make me feel? Recently, I've noticed that there's a lady in the Facebook groups that I hang out in, the business Facebook groups, that's having a lot of success, and she does similar work to mine, and it's actually triggered me a little bit. So I actually yesterday thanked her in my heart and in my mind for showing me that I still had work to do in this respect. You can ask yourself, how does that reflect an unhelpful belief that I might have in myself? And in my case, it's a remnant of the belief that if she has clients, then I can't have them because she's going to have the clients that were supposed to come to me, which is ridiculous, but this is what can happen. And also, you can also ask yourself, what does this remind me of? You know, is there a time when someone had the first command in the class, and this means that you were second, or you didn't get what you thought was yours? Because in school it's so competitive. If you have a first, a second, or a third, that can really leave other students feeling really bad about themselves. So that's your first option, and honestly I recommend doing journaling every day, at least to start with, and then whenever you feel an emotion that feels negative. The second option you have is emotional freedom technique. And I know it's controversial, it's not recognized by the medical community, but I just want to encourage you to try it, because that's what I did. I came across EFT for the first time in my life in 2000 and it must have been 5. I was under a lot of stress at work. They were doing a restructuring, and it was an international company. They put pressure for me to go back to France, and I was in a relationship with my husband. I was actually pregnant with our first child. So it was incredibly stressful, because I also knew that I couldn't find another job as a corporate lawyer in this country because I wasn't qualified as a solicitor. I didn't know English law that much, even though I had taken some exams in this country, but I wasn't fully qualified. And so there was lots of fears around my future, and in my daily life, in my job. And I looked into, because I was quite interested in alternative therapies, I looked into my local green paper, or whatever you call it, I can't remember, it was called The Spark at the time. And I found a lady who did emotional freedom technique. I thought, I'm going to give it a try. And even though it made me incredibly uncomfortable when I went to see her, because she did all sorts of weird things like ask me to tap on my head and sing happy birthday and do that, at the same time, at the end of the session, I felt better. And I thought, well, I'm a very practical girl. If I try something and it works, I do it again. If I don't try something and it doesn't work, if I know that I need to do it more than once for it to work, I will continue. But if it's really not my thing, then I'll just drop it. So what is emotional freedom technique? The idea is that you identify an unhelpful belief or an emotions that is coming to you. It could also be physical pain. And you tap on the meridian of your head, shoulders, and hands. Meridians, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what they are, but there are these energy channels that Chinese medicine believe runs through the body. And you don't need to actually know all that stuff. All you do is tap. So I'm gonna show you in a minute, and for those of you who are listening to the podcast, I encourage you to go on my YouTube channel, where you will find this podcast as a video, and then you can see my tapping sequence, so it helps. But what you want first is to identify what is the emotional scale of negative emotions, because obviously we don't need to work through positive emotions. They're good for us. So I love the work of Abraham Hicks. I've mentioned them before, and they have what they called an emotional scale. At the bottom, they put fear and depression. Then above that, guilt and insecurity. Then they talk about jealousy, rage, revenge, anger. We're going up the scale. Every time this is a more positive energy in the negative scale. So anger is actually better than revenge. So if you can shift yourself from revenge to anger, you're already ahead. And this is something I want to mention maybe here, because anger is a very repressed emotion in our society. But the more you repress it, the more then it can come out in really violent bursts. So dealing with your anger in a healthy way is to recognize it. And I'm going to share an anecdote about myself. Back in my 20s, I thought I was a person who never got angry. And it is true that it takes a lot for me to get angry. But the thing is, it was because my anger was repressed and pushed down so deep inside that I couldn't even feel it anymore, because I had no space to be angry as a child. In my family, you could say emotional intelligence was very, very low. And whenever we showed sign of angers, we would be squashed down by our parents. And that's because their parents did the same. You know, I'm not blaming them here, but that's not something I learned. So I was convinced that I was a person that didn't experience anger, and that's not possible. We all do. So if you're in the same space, please hear me. You are experiencing anger. This is my Frenchness coming out. We have a problem with the H's. And what happened for me is that because I denied my anger, it was in a vibe in my body that I wasn't expressing, and it actually attracted. This is where the law of attraction is actually fascinating. And I had this aha moment in my early 30s that I attracted a lot of angry people to me because I wouldn't own my anger. So everybody else around me was angry, but I wasn't angry because I was better than them, which was absolute rubbish. This doesn't work. We should embrace our emotions. You know, just because they're uncomfortable or negative, they're emotions, and we have them because we're human, and we have to own our humanness. We are not humans on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings on a human journey, and part of our path on this earth is to be okay with being human, which means not being perfect, which is having negative emotions occasionally, and all that, making mistakes, etc. So I'll continue with the emotional scale. Above anger is discouragement. Above discouragement is blame. Then we go up with worry, then doubt, disappointment, overwhelm, frustration, and pessimism. If you experience any of these, and you can move up and down the scales depending on the topic or whatever happens in your day, then you need to address these emotions first through journaling, EFT, as I said, which I'm explaining in a minute, and then I have a third option for you later in this podcast. So what I encourage you to do throughout the day is, how do I feel? Ask yourself, how do I feel now? How do I feel about this? So that you become more attuned to your own emotions. And it's not going to turn you into a blubbering mess. It's going to turn you into an aware person. And awareness of emotions is the first step in becoming responsible for them, for taking responsibility for your emotions. If you don't, what you're likely to do is project them onto someone else. So first, take the blame out of your emotions. Recognize that it's absolutely normal to feel negative emotions, and own them and do what's necessary with them to transmute them, to process them. And sometimes you just need to sit with it and feel the emotion, because emotion passes. It comes and it goes. It's never permanent. And you can see that because even with the happy emotions, even with the positive emotions, you might get really, really happy, and then it fades and you go back into this like level plane. Because we can't always be high or low, or we have to have some sort of more, I suppose, more level plane that is more comfortable. So first, once you ask yourself, how do I feel now? The EFT starts with a statement that tries to express exactly where you're at. So, for example, suppose I was bumping into someone from my old job and they asked me how I was going, and I started feeling bad about the fact that whatever it is, I leave them and I ask myself, how do I feel now? And I will say maybe something, I will feel something like maybe regret. So even though I feel shame and regret that I'm not in my glorious former employment, I completely love and accept myself. What you do was you say this statement, you say it 3 times, and you tap on the side of your hand with 2 fingers. So it's the outside of your hand where your little finger is. So you start with this statement and you say, or I have another statement here that I noted down. Even though I feel discouraged right now, I completely love and accept myself. What this does, it aligns you with how you feel. Because if you want something, but you have an emotion that is the opposite of what you want, you will have this disconnect within you. You will have this misalignment. And that means that everything's going to be an effort, because your conscious mind will want something and your subconscious mind will want the opposite, or will be on the opposite scale of the spectrum. And that is exhausting. So what I'm saying here is this whole episode is to help you to be aligned with what you want, so that everything becomes much easier. So that's called the karate chops, and that's where you start. Once you've done that, you tap on the top of your head, and I'm showing this on the video, but you will be able to head over to YouTube if you're listening to the podcast only. Then you tap on the inner brow, so on the, well, I think it speaks for itself. Then you tap on the side of your eye, then under your eye, under your nose, on your chin. Then there's what we call a pain point just underneath your collarbone, probably about 1 inch. If you press, you can feel the pain. That's another place where you tap. Then you tap under your arm, and for women we call that the bra line. So it's about 1 inch underneath your armpit. And then we start with the hand, and you can do with 2 fingers always. You can do the wrist, inside your wrist, and then you can do each finger on the out, on the side that's out. So if you start with the thumb, you will be tapping on the side of your thumb, and then each finger. And then when you reach the karate chop again, you start with the opening statement. Now, the reason why we use that is because the emotions are stored as energy in our bodies, and by tapping, we release them. We make them come to the surface. So the art in EFT is in defining the opening statement and then tapping through the emotions. So if I had started with, even though I feel discouraged right now, then I would probably say, business has been so quiet recently. I don't know where my next client's going to come from. I feel discouraged. And each time you continue to tap all the time when on the points following the sequence that I described. And what's going to happen is as you tap, you might have other feelings that come up. It's almost like a string of feelings and emotions that you're unraveling a ball of yarn. And the reason for this is that your emotions are processed through your amygdala, that then that governs both the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. And one of these hippos, I never know which one, so I call just them the hippos because I can't be bothered to. But one of them clumps events, emotions together to make sense of your life. So if you start working on an opening statement, very often what's going to happen is another statement or feeling or experience that associated with that statement will come to the surface because it's been clumped together by your hippo. And so what will happen is once you get to a point, what I forgot to say, just a very important thing is before you start, you want to assess how strong is that statement on a scale of 1 to 10. Because as you tap, then you want to tune back in and say, okay, where am I? Am I still at 10? Am I at 7? When you get to 3 or 2, that means that probably another of these clumped emotions will come up to the surface. So then you shift to the next one. It's absolutely fine to shift to the next one if a new emotion surfaces. So you just keep on tapping and keep on tapping. You can, so if you're in company and something happens that upsets you, you can actually imagine tapping on your points silently without doing any physical work or visible tapping, and that still helps. The other thing that's quite fascinating, and that's if you're going to have EFT with a practitioner, is that if you get too emotional to even think or do the tapping, or you forget, the practitioner can actually tap on themselves and do it vicariously for you. So that's why even if you were too at this point too skeptical to do the actual tapping, watching EFT videos can really be helpful for you. And I want to recommend a man who does some really good EFT videos, who's called, let me just check his name, Gary, I know it's where did I put this, Brad Yates. He's very well known in his fields, and he has loads of different videos for all sorts of different things. So that's the basics of EFT. It does not suit everyone. You know, every method, you might not be ready, or it might not be for you, but at least give it one try. But what I want to say as well is that if you have big traumas, if you have huge emotions that you know are there because you've had maybe a very trying childhood, or even the last few years of your life have been going through very, very difficult things, I would recommend that you work with a practitioner rather than on your own on these issues, because it can bring this stuff up. But for all of what we call the small T's, which are the small traumas that are not even considered traumas by the, you know, the psychology field, but that can still be traumatic for us, like for example witnessing a car accident. You're not in the accident, but you can still be traumatized by watching it. This is a relatively small T, unless it was a very grueling accident, so you can tap on that very quickly. And if you're in a hurry, you can just tap on your wrist, on the inside of your wrist. Now the third option is, and this is within business, because we're not talking about therapy here, we're just talking about a healthy management of emotions. You might need therapy, and if that's the case, please reach out for a professional. But to have a coach, and I want to say, talk about this example because this is what happened to me last week. Well, we're Monday, so it was last week. I actually had a session with my coach that I found quite profound. I was quite discouraged, and she held a space for me where I could express my emotions without trying to be positive all the time. This is not actually a good thing, because if you try to be positive when you have things that are troubling you, it's like spraying your bin with perfume. The bin's still there, it's all there, but you don't take it out and get rid of it. So I had my coach held a beautiful space for me that enabled me to tell about the story of my discouragement, and she didn't try to negate it. She just kept on listening, and listening skills are very powerful. What most people want, they don't want someone to give them advice. They want to be heard. They want their feelings to be acknowledged. They want to understand that someone gets them. And what happened is, and if you want to know a bit more about coaching, I did an episode 44 with Stephanie Kakris that was really good about how to get the best coach, how to decide who's best for you, etc. But what I saw in this, within an hour with my coach, I was able to completely shift over from discouragement to knowing I was completely on track. That even though a course that I launched didn't have the uptake that I expected, it was perfect as it was. I know that the universe always has my back, and that there's always a reason for not more people signing up. And in effect, I have actually a group of beautiful people who absolutely make me happy with the journey that we're on at the moment. So it was my mind constructing all these things and these unhelpful beliefs coming to the front, but it was great to help me to process them rather than them festering in me. So do not ignore your emotions, okay? Remember the bucket. Entrepreneurship and business in general is actually an incredible journey of self-development. It will press all your buttons much more than a job will ever do. And the reason is because you're in control. When you're in an employment, on some level, unless you've reached the top management, someone else tells you what to do, and then it's easy to blame someone else because you're just doing what they ask you to do. You know what I mean? So, but when you're an entrepreneur, you're the boss. You decide what happens. You make mistakes. You have all these unhelpful beliefs, and you have to become aware of them, because otherwise you sabotage your business. So very, very important. This episode is probably one of the most important of my whole series so far. Not that I want to lower the importance of the other stuff, but I want to say, if you want some help with your mindset, your emotions, and generally with coaching, I would love to work with you. I want to add this episode with one thing, that I've been reading a book called Blink, which I find fascinating. Even though I don't think it's so much about intuition, but I'm researching my book. I'm writing a book about intuition. And I was really interested to read it was about racism. So what the author was saying is that our values, conscious values, are often different from our subconscious values. And I remember, because sadly I was raised in a relatively racist environment, I remember one of my friends from a past life, almost now, because I moved countries and I'm not in touch with her at all, who was married to a Japanese man. So she said to me, I'm not racist. But I knew she was, because she said racist things about North African people. She was saying racist things about black people constantly. And we're not always that openly racist, but just be aware that, for example, if you live, even in our society, there's so many things that are not conducive to diversity, but we're not aware of them because we're privileged. And because we've been raised, and everything that you hear before you're 8 years old goes straight into your subconscious, and it becomes your subconscious values. So what I realized reading this book is that even though I don't consider myself as a racist, there is a possibility that on a subconscious level, I might still hold this energy of racism that I was raised in, if that makes any sense. So it's no use blaming yourself. We're the product of our society and our environment and our education. But it's important to take stock at one point and reflect and become aware. This whole episode is about awareness. So try to say to yourself, it's okay if I have this underlying racism, or whatever it is that you have this emotion. It could be like, there's another aspect that you will probably understand better, that I found fascinating in this book. He was talking about the fact that they did a study, and at the board of directors level, all the men were taller than 6 foot tall, which means that there's a bias towards short people in business world with regards to boardrooms. Tall people have more authority. And I found that fascinating as well. It's the bias that we don't realize is there. And I want you to start this journey of awareness, because I'm here to awaken the business world. And I hope you will play along with me in this awakening. The book Blink is really interesting. I recommend it to you. It talks about thin slicing, and even I learned about sales in that book. I thought that was really interesting, because we come with prejudice, whether we realize it or not. I know for my part, even though I have disconstructed a lot of this prejudice, but being born in Paris, people are very snobbish about how people dress, and they judge other people on the way they dress instantly. And we do that as well without being a Parisian. You could still have that bias. If someone perhaps doesn't know how to match colors, or who doesn't know how to wear some clothes that are flattering for them, or if they wear leggings, for example, you might make a class judgment immediately. So reflect. reflect. Reflection is essential to become better people in business. And in business, we have a power to make a change. So my invitation today is for you to become more aware so that you can change the world where you are. The change always starts with us. So thank you for listening to this episode. I don't know what I'm going to talk about next week, but that will be a surprise for you, because every week I just tune into the energy of what people need to hear. So have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye for now.